This story is about how myths intertwine with engineering and how everyday life proves to be no less amazing than epic tales. The ancient world is not a museum, but a puzzle with many missing pieces. First fact, the ancient Babylonians used a sexagesimal numeral system, hence our 60 minutes in an hour and 360 degrees in a circle. However, more importantly, they used fractions representing divisions by 3, 4, 5, and so on, because 60 is easily divisible by many numbers. Their clay tablets, dating back to the 3rd millennium BCE, contain tables of squares and cubes. In other words, at the time when the pyramids were just beginning to be built, Mesopotamia was already solving problems reminiscent of a 7th grade curriculum. Second fact, public toilets in ancient Rome were not merely hygienic facilities, but an integral part of urban culture. Stone benches with cutouts along the edges, a channel for water below, and a stick with a sponge, everything was quite functional. However, more importantly, people didn't use them alone. They discussed business, argued, gossiped. It was almost like a cafe without coffee. Archaeologists have found dozens of such places, from Ephesus to Ostia, and even inscriptions like, "He who writes here, let him know, his hands will become shorter." Perhaps the oldest analog of "don't write on the walls." Fact number 3. The palace in Knossos, the capital of the Minoan civilization, contained over 300 rooms, staircases, a sewage system, and even a ventilation system. This was 1,500 years before our era. The myth of the Minotaur's labyrinth, according to one version, originated here, not because anyone believed in the monster, but because the palace itself was so confusing that it was easy to get lost. Archaeologist Arthur Evans, who discovered it at the beginning of the 20th century, initially thought he had found a royal resort. Later, he realized he was facing a whole city within a city. Fact number 4. Egyptians used cosmetics not only for beauty, but also for medicinal purposes. Black eyeliner, made from lead compounds, acted as an antiseptic in small doses, protecting against infections. Furthermore, under the scorching sun, it reduced glare and eye irritation. Research from the Louvre and Sorbonne showed that such ointments stimulated the skin's immune response. Therefore, ancient fashion was also a form of street pharmacology, remarkably advanced for 3,000 years before our era. ChatGPT noted this. Fifth established fact, Cleopatra did not speak Egyptian, but rather Koine Greek, a common dialect of Greek prevalent throughout the Hellenistic world. She descended from the Ptolemaic dynasty, Macedonians who came to Egypt after Alexander the Great. For almost 3 centuries, her ancestors ruled the country without bothering to learn the language of the local population. Cleopatra became an exception. According to Plutarch, she mastered several languages, including Egyptian. This was not merely respect for her subjects, it was a political strategy. It was about power, not a love of linguistics. Sixth fact, Assyrians favored depicting terrifying details. When King Ashurbanipal commissioned depictions of victories, artists didn't shy away from vivid colors. The bodies of defeated enemies, piles of spoils, captives with severed limbs. Paradoxically, Ashurbanipal himself was perhaps the most intellectual of all conquerors. He assembled the largest library of his time, containing over 30,000 clay tablets. Among them are the Epic of Gilgamesh, medical texts, astronomy, and letters. They now reside in the British Museum, and half remain undeciphered. Seventh fact. In China, during the Han Dynasty, 2nd century before the Common Era, the workings of a seismograph were understood. The device resembled a bronze vase adorned with dragons surrounded by bronze toads. A pendulum was situated inside. During an earthquake, the pendulum shifted and a ball would fall from the mouth of one of the dragons into a toad's mouth. This indicated the direction of the tremor. The invention is attributed to the scientist Zhang Heng. While the exact construction is debated, archaeologists and engineers acknowledge the principle works. Therefore, the idea was sound. 18 centuries before Richter. Eighth fact. Greek sculptures were originally brightly painted. The idea of white marble classics is a misconception of later eras. In antiquity, Athena's eyes were painted, Apollo's lips, and hoplite shields. Mineral pigments were used, followed by a wax coating. Why did all the paint disappear? The paint faded in the sun and rain, and by the 19th century, only dust remained during excavations. Only with the advent of infrared photography and microscopy did it become clear. Antiquity was colorful. Later, a different image was invented for it, statues speaking in silence, although initially they shouted with color. The ninth fact concerns the sophisticated sanitation system in ancient India, dating back to the 3rd millennium BCE. Cities of the Indus Valley civilization, such as Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, featured sewer lines that carried wastewater away from homes. Almost every dwelling had its own bathroom, and water was supplied through channels. Streets were paved with bricks sloped to drain rainwater. Even in Rome, 1,500 years later, household hygiene wasn't as widespread. Indian engineering at that time surpassed not only its contemporaries, but also many future empires. 10th fact. Spartans did not build walls. According to Plutarch, they believed that the best fortress of the city was its warriors. This is not just a beautiful phrase. For several centuries, Sparta indeed did not have defensive fortifications, and no one dared to attack. The main thing in their system is not architecture, but upbringing. From the age of 7, boys were taken to agoge, a system of harsh training, where endurance, discipline, and silence were valued. To defeat an army where warriors ate black broth and slept on reed mats was indeed not so simple. 11th fact. In ancient Alexandria existia unique device, o vendilium, ou temple door, which opened by self when a priest plaçava sacrifício no altar. This was one of the first automatons. Its inventor, Hero of Alexandria, usou água vapor e sistema de levers. A heat from the fire expanded the air in a hidden reservoir, criando pressão que ativava o mecanismo. Temple visitors believed the door opened by the will of the gods. Em realidade, it operated according to the laws of physics. Hero described dozens de similar devices, including protótipo de uma steam turbine. 12th fact, the Phoenicians invented not only the alphabet, but also the purple dye industry. The dye was extracted from murex sea snails inhabiting the Mediterranean Sea. Thousands of shells were needed to obtain a couple of grams. The resulting color was durable and noble, from burgundy to deep purple. It became a symbol of power and wealth, especially among the Persians and Romans. Purple cost as much as gold, and in Byzantium only emperors wore it. In Tyre, archaeologists found entire heaps of discarded shells. Production lasted for centuries, leaving a purple mark on world fashion. Fact 13. The Sumerians had professional scribes who were trained according to special programs in schools, edebas. These schools were already operating in the 3rd millennium BC. Textbooks included lists of synonyms, proverbs, and exercises in counting and writing. Some tablets have preserved school dialogues. The scribe didn't do his homework. The teacher hit him with a stick. The father gave the teacher a gift, and he relented. This was not a joke, but a reflection of reality. Even then, complaints about teachers and clever compromises between students, parents, and instructors were part of school folklore. Fact number 14. The first grain supply contracts appeared in Egypt during the Middle Kingdom, 1,000 years before our era. Papyrus documents specified the names of the parties involved, quantities, deadlines, and even force majeure events such as floods or nomadic raids. At the Temple of Amun in Karnak, special officials oversaw the storage and distribution of the harvest. One such document survives. A supplier named Sinuhe undertook to deliver a certain amount of barley within 3 lunar months, otherwise he would lose his land. Thus, bureaucracy became integrated with agricultural technology. Fact number 15. Ancient Greek architects constructed circular theaters with astonishing acoustics that continue to amaze engineers today. In Epidaurus, for instance, the sound of a coin dropping on stage is audible even from the highest rows. The angle of the seating and the arena's shape were carefully designed. The stone acted as a natural low-frequency filter, and the actor's voice, reflecting upwards, retained its power. All this was achieved without microphones, relying solely on mathematics and limestone. Modern acousticians acknowledge that replicating this effect without amplification is nearly impossible. Fact number 16. In Persepolis, the capital of the Achaemenid Empire, clay tablets containing records of workers' salaries have been found. These records indicate that women received less pay than men, but were granted paid maternity leave and provided with child nutrition, grain, oil, and wine. Some women even held managerial positions. The tablets, written in Elamite, date back to the 5th century before our era. These are not laws, but everyday accounting documents. Therefore, social accounting existed long before Roman decrees and declarations. 17th fact. Pythagoras was not merely a mathematician, but also the leader of a religious community with strict discipline. His followers abstained from eating beans, seriously believing that the souls of the deceased resided within them. New members were admitted to his teachings only after a 5-year period of silence. Pythagoras himself left behind no writings. Everything we know comes from his disciples. They attributed almost magical properties to him. He supposedly remembered his past lives, calmed storms with his voice, and could leave his body. This was not a geometry circle, but a cult, with a code of conduct, rituals, and an almost divine teacher. 18th fact. On a stone pillar erected by Ashoka, the ruler of India in the 3rd century BCE, laws are inscribed that call for tolerance, non-violence, and care for animals. Ashoka came to power after a bloody war with Kalinga, in which tens of thousands of people perished. It was after this massacre that he adopted Buddhism and began reforms. The inscriptions state, "The sovereign considers all subjects his children," and "there should be no killing of living beings." This is one of the earliest attempts to translate morality into politics. Pillars with such texts stood throughout the empire, a stone conscience on the roads. 19th fact. Soldiers in Alexander the Great's army used individual water filters, simple nets through which they strain water from rivers and swamps. This wasn't an act of care, but a survival measure. Campaigns passed through hot and swampy areas where intestinal infections killed faster than spears. Furthermore, latrine placement in camps was strictly controlled, always downstream. And although unsanitary conditions still existed, the Macedonian army demonstrated almost monstrous mobility. One of the secrets? Simple yet sensible hygiene. Fact number 20. The first known prostheses were discovered in Thebes, Egypt, dating back to the 13th century BC. One of them is an artificial big toe made of wood and leather. It was attached to a sandal and allowed the person to walk normally. The wear and tear indicates constant use. It was not merely a symbol, but a functional device. Modern orthopedists and bioengineers have replicated the prosthesis in a laboratory and confirmed its functionality. Walking with it is possible with almost no limp. This suggests that ancient physicians not only treated illnesses, but also experimented with the mechanics of the body. In Mesopotamia, as early as the 2nd millennium BCE, marriage contracts existed. These contracts detailed not only property arrangements, but also the conduct of the spouses. For instance, a wife could forfeit part of her dowry for publicly humiliating her husband. Conversely, a husband was obligated to return his wife to her father's house if he became unable to support the family. Some contracts even stipulated fines for adultery. These documents were written in cuneiform script on clay tablets and sealed with witnesses' seals. Therefore, marriage was considered not merely a union, but a socio-economic agreement with sanctions. Fact number 22. Ordinary Egyptians rarely used the pharaoh's name. Instead, they said Lord of the Two Lands or simply House, Pharaoh, from which the word pharaoh later originated. It was not so much a person as a living institution, a combination of earthly and divine power. Temple text stated, "The pharaoh gave bread," even if a subordinate official distributed the bread. The title pharaoh first appeared in the 15th century BC. It denoted the palace, but gradually became associated with the person. Thus, architecture became a title, and the building a metaphor for power. Fact number 23. Ancient Olympic athletes completely naked. This wasn't due to aesthetics, but rather custom. It was believed that clothing hindered the body's display of perfection. Even the word gymnasium comes from the Greek gymnos, meaning naked. Before the start, athletes oiled themselves and then dusted themselves with powder to prevent slipping. Winners received olive wreaths and lifelong support from their city-state. Losers received almost nothing. Some, overcome with shame, didn't even return home. The Olympics were not a game, but a test of social status. Fact number 24. The Celts lacked a written language, but they had professional memorizers, the Druids. They underwent decades of training and knew hundreds of poems, laws, and rituals by heart. Caesar wrote that a Druid's training lasted up to 20 years. Everything was transmitted orally. Written fixation was considered a violation of the sacred order. Some texts were passed down in the form of songs, with a specific rhythm and melody, to avoid distortion. Thus, the collective memory of the Celts rested not on libraries, but on the voices of individuals. Oral culture was not inferior to written culture. It simply followed a different path. Fact number 25. In ancient Uruk, one of the world's first cities, more than 50,000 people lived there in the 3rd millennium before our era. For comparison, Athens during Socrates' time housed approximately 30,000. Uruk possessed streets, temples, administrative buildings, a sewage system, and a food supply system. Many historians believe that writing, cuneiform on clay, originated here. The city was divided into districts with different functions: religious, craft, and commercial. Inhabitants paid taxes in grain, and all economic activity was managed by scribes. Uruk was a megacity long before the word megacity existed. Fact 26. In South America, pre-Inca civilizations built roads across the Andes without using the wheel. An example is the Wari culture. They had paved trails, suspension bridges made of grasses, stone staircases, and signposts. They knew about wheels. Toys on wheels have been found by archaeologists, but in mountainous conditions they were useless. Instead of carts, they used llamas, capable of carrying loads along narrow paths. That is, the transport revolution was solved not through technology, but through adaptation. Not what to invent, but what is not needed. This was logistical genius masked as simplicity. Fact number 27. On the island of Crete, archaeologists discovered a board game approximately 3,500 years old. It is conventionally called the game from Knossos. It is a wooden board, decorated with inlays of gold, ivory, and faience. The playing field is divided into cells with small cups for game pieces nearby. The exact rules of the game have not been reconstructed, but it is assumed that it was analogous to backgammon or other games involving moving pieces, similar to the royal game of Priests may have also played the game. Therefore, even during the era of palaces, collapses, and earthquakes, people found time for leisure and made it luxurious. Fact number 28. The Hittite Empire, one of the strongest states of the 2nd millennium BCE, possessed a military intelligence service. Texts mention the ears of the king, agents who reported on enemy movements, the situation in vassal lands, and even the mood within the capital. Some reports were encrypted. One tablet from Hattusa states that the message should be read only by one who knows the sign of the sun. The Hittites used intelligence not only for war, but also for negotiations. Before sending gifts to Egypt, they checked the situation in Thebes. espionage predated diplomacy. Fact number 29. The ancient Maya possessed a calendar system whose accuracy impresses even 21st century astronomers. Their so-called long count tracked days beginning from a mythical creation date, August 11th, 3114 years before the Common Era, according to the Gregorian calendar. They precisely calculated the solar year with an error of less than 2 minutes, and were aware of the cycles of the moon, Venus, and eclipses. All calculations were performed without telescopes, solely through observation and mathematics. Temples were oriented by the stars, and rulers scheduled ceremonies according to specific celestial configurations. This was not mysticism, but rather precise time engineering. Fact 30. In the Hittite kingdom, located in the territory of modern Turkey, there were detailed laws protecting trees. One of the codes states, if someone cut down a grapevine, the penalty was a silver fine. If they damaged a tree, they were obligated to plant a new one. This wasn't ecology driven by love for nature, but economics. Trees provided food, shade, and support for vineyards. The system was meticulously designed. The number of trees needed for restoration, the assignment of responsibility, and the calculation of damages were all specified. It turns out that the ancients already understood that sustainability is not a word, but a practice. Fact 31. In Peru, archaeologists have discovered enigmatic devices, quipu, systems of knotted cords. These served as a counting system and possibly a form of writing. The Inca used them, but the idea is older. Each color, knot type, and its position encoded information. The surviving quipu tell of grain counts, taxes, and military campaigns. Some modern linguists believe that complex quipu could contain verbal information, although this is unproven. Unlike alphabets, the recording is not visual but tactile. Archives you can touch, a cipher hidden in rope. Fact number 32. In China, during the Tang Dynasty, a system of state examinations for the selection of officials already existed. To obtain a position, it was necessary to demonstrate merit, not connections. Candidates underwent a rigorous competitive examination, including tests in poetry, philosophy, and calligraphy. Examinations were held in separate cells, where candidates were allowed to bring only food and writing materials. They lasted up to 3 days. The best candidates received positions in the capital, the others in the provinces. Career advancement depended on talent and memory, not on noble birth. This system lasted for over 1,000 years and became a prototype of modern meritocratic selection. Fact number 33. In modern-day Bulgaria, the oldest worked gold in human history has been found, the treasures of the Varna necropolis. The age of these finds is more than 6,500 years. These include bracelets, diadems, belt ornaments, and vessels, all made with jeweler's precision. Almost 3,000 items were found in total in the graves, one of which lacks a skeleton. Only gold, carefully arranged as if a person were present but disappeared. Scientists suggest this was a symbolic grave, a sign of special status. That is, power through metal existed long before the first kings. Fact 34. The Etruscans, a mysterious people of pre-Roman Italy, possessed talking mirrors. These were bronze discs engraved with myths, scenes from life, and enigmatic inscriptions in the Etruscan language. Many mirrors depict women not as companions to men, but as independent figures. They argue, predict, judge. Some researchers believe that Etruscan women had more rights than Greek or Roman women. They participated in feasts, managed households, and are mentioned in epitaphs. The mirrors reflect not only a facial image, but also the image of a role, unseen and forgotten. Fact 35. During the construction of canals in Mesopotamia, floating levels, devices for leveling water, were used. They were wooden troughs with floats and notches, which workers used to ensure that the water flowed evenly, preventing flooding of the banks. This was not a drawing on clay, but a mobile tool that was moved along the canal. Archaeologists have discovered descriptions of such devices in texts from the time of King Hammurabi. Therefore, hydraulic engineering was not just engineering. It was a precise science with instruments not inferior to ancient ones. Fact number 36. In the Bronze Age on Crete, a writing system known as Linear A was used. To this day, it remains undeciphered. Tablets with these symbols have been found in Knossos, Phaistos, and other Minoan centers. The writing system displayed orderliness, repeating formulas, numbers, and tables. It was possibly used for inventory management. However, the language in which it was written is unknown. Linear B, used later by the Mycenaeans, was deciphered as Ancient Greek, but Linear A remains an enigma. It's not just a set of symbols, it's the voice of a culture that we cannot yet hear. Fact number 37. The army of ancient Rome utilized portable mini-catapults, scorpions. These were mechanisms that launched arrows up to 1 meter long with such force that they could pierce shields and armor. The design was a combination of wood, bronze, and twisted fibers acting as springs. A single crew operated up to 4 scorpions, and each could be repositioned in a few minutes. On the battlefield, they provided an advantage even before close combat. Therefore, a legion was not simply a column with pila, but a complex machine, including ballistics, sappers, and long-range accuracy. Fact number 38. The earliest mentions of eyeglasses, or more accurately, magnifying lenses, are found in Assyrian documents. A quartz lens with a focusing effect was discovered in the library of Ashurbanipal. It could have been used as a magnifying glass or a burning glass. Similar lenses have been found in Mycenaean tombs and on Cyprus. The most famous is the Nimrud lens, approximately 3,000 years old. Some believe it was part of an optical instrument, perhaps even a telescope. However, there is no definitive proof. Nevertheless, the fact remains. Ancient peoples not only saw, but also attempted to improve their vision with their own hands. Fact 39. The Aztecs had their own judicial system with cassation and appeal procedures. Judges were trained in schools at the palace. They were forbidden from accepting gifts, and violators were punished by confiscation of property. Codes have survived that describe cases ranging from interfamily disputes to thefts. It is interesting that false accusations were punished as severely as the crimes themselves. The highest court was under the ruler of Tenochtitlan, and its decisions were final and could not be appealed. Aztec jurisprudence was not a ritual, but a formalized branch of power that operated on a schedule. In Caucasia, Siberia, archaeologists discovered stone slabs with engraved maps, schematic representations of the terrain, rivers, and settlements. These are dated to the Bronze Age. The most famous is the slab from the Sunduki Pass. It combines a map with a solar calendar. Some lines precisely match the landscape, others indicate the sun's positions on the solstices. Scientists suggest these slabs were used as both landmarks and cult objects. This means spatial thinking and the concept of time were united in stone. Fact 41. In ancient Babylon, physicians received legally mandated payment, but also bore legal responsibility for their actions. Hammurabi's code includes a clause. If a physician operated on a free man with a bronze knife and the man died, the physician's hand was cut off. However, if the patient recovered, the physician received generous payment, up to 10 shekels of silver. For a slave, the punishment was lighter and the payment lower. This contractual approach made medicine not a divine mercy, but a profession with rates, risks, and status. It was a prototype of a medical license, strict but systematic. Fact 42. Inhabitants of ancient Nubia, south of Egypt, practiced cranial surgery, trepanation, 1,000 years before our era. Skulls with neat, round holes have been found in Sudan, and most show signs of healing. This indicates that patients survived the procedure. The tools were simple: flint and bronze knives, possibly even a bow drill. The purpose of the procedures is debated. Some believe it treated injuries, others that it had ritualistic significance. However, the technique was precise. Therefore, anatomical knowledge came not from texts, but from practice. Fact number 43. The city of Teotihuacan, located in central Mexico, predates the Aztecs by millennia. It featured straight streets, distinct artisan districts, and quarters for foreigners. It was the first megacity in the Americas with zoned urban planning. Along the Avenue of the Dead were temples, residential complexes, and marketplaces. Archaeologists have found evidence of dozens of ethnic groups, including the Maya. This multinational composition points to trade, diplomacy, and sophisticated urban planning. The identities of its rulers remain a mystery. However, at its peak, the population reached 200,000, comparable to Imperial Rome.
Fact 44. The ancient Greeks not only studied the stars, but also created instruments for tracking them. The most famous is the Antikythera mechanism, a bronze device retrieved from the seabed at the beginning of the 20th century. It was an analog computing calculator. Dozens of gears rotating at a set speed allowed for predicting solar and lunar eclipses, the phases of the moon, and even the Olympic Games. In complexity, it is comparable to 17th century clocks, but it was created at least 1,000 years before them. The mechanism was lost to history and became the first computer of antiquity.
In the Sumerian city of Lagash, approximately 24 centuries before our era, the concept of reform was first recorded in history. Ruler Ur-Nammu issued decrees limiting the arbitrary actions of officials and priests. He abolished funeral fees, obligated the state to feed widows and orphans, and prohibited forced labor for debt. Inscriptions state, he gave freedom to the people of the city. The word amargi became a symbol of liberation. This was not a revolution, but a subtle attempt to balance power and society. The world's first defense against corruption came not from a manifesto, but from cuneiform script.
Fact 46. Ancient Greeks had all-seeing judges, jurors selected randomly and in vast numbers. In Athens of the 5th century BC, up to 1,500 people could sit in courts simultaneously. They listened to both sides, had no lawyers, and voted using bronze tokens. Votes were counted immediately after the debate, and the decision came into effect instantly. Judges received payment from the state, so even the poor could participate. Such a system limited corruption, too many opinions to buy them all. Greek justice was a theater of the people, noisy, direct, and immediate.
Fact 47th. Spartan women had the right to own land, inherit property, and even train in gymnasiums. This sharply contrasted with Athens, where women could not participate in assemblies and lived in isolation. In Sparta, girls engaged in sports, received education, and participated in public life. The idea was simple: a strong mother, a strong warrior. Historians cite the phrase of a Spartan woman giving her son a shield, with it or on it. This was not an egalitarian utopia, but in the conditions of a military state, women were assigned a strategic role. Their status was not cultural, but functional, and therefore durable.
Fact 48. On Easter Island, multi-ton moai statues were erected, made of stone but apparently moved vertically. Researchers have shown that the statues could be walked, rocking them from side to side using ropes and a group of carriers. Local legends say the statues walked themselves. This technique, imitating walking, allowed the movement of the colossi without wheels or animals. Some traces on the soles of the moai do indeed indicate vertical friction. It turns out the engineering solution was not in heavy machinery, but in balance and patience, almost like a dance of stones. In ancient Babylon, there existed houses of life, institutions where not only treatment, but also medical education took place. Tablets describe dozens of symptoms, diagnoses, and treatment methods, from fractures to depression. Illnesses were divided into visible and invisible. Physicians worked in pairs with priests, and treatment included both physical procedures and incantations. But the main thing was the archives. A physician had to know the text by heart, record the results, and pass them on to students. This was not only practice, but also a school. Medicine stemmed not from ritual, but from observation and memory, centuries before Hippocrates.
Fact 50. In the Viking Age, Scandinavian peoples had industrial metallurgical centers hidden in bogs. Archaeologists have found furnaces where iron was smelted from bog ore. The locations were carefully concealed to prevent enemies from discovering where swords and axes were produced. The technology was complex. The ore was roasted, then sintered in clay crucibles, and the slag was separated. The resulting iron was used for weapons, nails, and ship parts. Production was seasonal but organized. Workers lived nearby, stored wood, and protected the site. It turns out that even in the Dark Ages, the economy required logistics and secrecy.
Fact 51. In ancient China, during the Shang dynasty, divination bones were used, ox scapula and tortoise shells. Questions were inscribed on them, addressed to the spirits. The bone was then burned, and the answers were divined from the cracks. The questions were specific. Should we attack tomorrow? Will the king's wife bear a son? Will the gods help the harvest? These bones are the earliest evidence of Chinese writing. They were not merely magic, but daily bureaucracy bordering on the sacred. They were kept in archives and then buried in the ground as a dialogue with heaven, completed and closed.
Point 52. The Romans had special road maps, itineraria, where routes were indicated with distances between stations and landmarks. The most famous is the Puttinger Table, a large scroll depicting the entire network of Roman roads from Britain to India. Roads are shown linearly, like subway maps, but with the real names of cities, post stations, and inns. These maps were used by travelers, officials, and the military. Therefore, Rome was not just a territory. It was a logistical system where movement was regulated not by improvisation, but by plan. Fact 53. The Xiongnu, a nomadic people who preceded the Huns, had a rigid social hierarchy documented in official records. Chinese chronicles describe their elaborate court protocol, where everyone had their designated place, from the Shanyu, supreme ruler, to the keepers of the herds. Leaders were seated according to rank, received varying shares of the spoils, and violators of order were punished publicly. Interestingly, diplomatic letters from the Shanyu to Chinese emperors strictly copied the style of the Celestial Empire, including the same titles. This was steppe diplomacy, harsh yet structured, with ritual and a subtle understanding of ceremony.
Fact number 54. In ancient Egypt, the profession of a mummifier was hereditary, and the embalming process itself could last up to 70 days. The process involved removing the brain through the nose using metal hooks, rinsing the cavities with palm wine, drying in natron, and wrapping the body in hundreds of meters of fabric. Remarkably, each action was accompanied by formulas. Do not harm the heart. Grant the organ passage to the afterlife. This was not a medical, but a sacred task, where precision was combined with magic. Even amulets were placed according to a strict scheme, like a code for transition to another life.
Fact number 55. In ancient Greece, there existed commemorative coins that served not only as currency, but also as a means of propaganda. After the victory at the Battle of Salamis, the Athenians issued a series of coins depicting a ship and an owl, symbols of naval power and wisdom. These coins spread throughout the Mediterranean. They were accepted even in distant Persia. Thus, the currency became a city's calling card, a way to broadcast its prestige. The Greeks understood that ideology works not only through temples and theaters, but also through everyday objects, especially if they jingle in one's purse.
Fact 56. In the Persian Empire during the reign of Darius the Great, a state postal system existed, the Angaria, a precursor to modern courier services. Throughout the empire, stations were located every 20 to 30 kilometers, where couriers could change horses and continue their journey. Herodotus wrote, "Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night stays these couriers." This phrase later adorned a building of the American Postal Service. Letters were transmitted in leather tubes, and the routes were known only to the initiated. Such a network allowed Darius to govern his empire from India to Egypt. The empire relied not only on swords, but also on messages. Point 57. The ancient Armenian kingdom of Urartu possessed a centralized irrigation system comparable in scale to the Roman one. The most famous monument is the Menwa Canal, constructed in the 8th century BC. It stretched almost 80 kilometers from mountain springs to the capital Tushpa, present-day Van in Turkey. The canal's route included stone aqueducts, tunnels, and slopes where a precise gradient was maintained. A part of it still functions. The modern Armenian village of Orange receives water along this 3,000-year-old route. Urartu's engineering was not for aesthetics, it literally kept the cities afloat. Fact 58. In Mohenjo-Daro, a major center of the Indus Valley civilization, there existed a great bath with a drainage system and facing that predated Roman baths by 1,000 years. The structure had a pool approximately 7 by 12 meters with a waterproof brick bottom and steps around the edges. Water was supplied through special channels, and wastewater was directed to a separate drain. Scientists debate whether it was a religious object or a public place of purification. However, it is clear that the understanding of sanitation and body culture in this society was advanced, a level that Europe would only reach in the late Middle Ages. Point 59. In ancient Alexandria, there was a vending machine for holy water, a device activated by dropping a coin. It was invented by Hero of Alexandria in the 1st century BC. Inside was a lever connected to a valve. The coin, by its weight, opened the flow of water and then returned to its original position. This was the world's first vending machine, although it dispensed not soda but consecrated water. It stood at the entrance to temples, where pilgrims did not want to wait for an attendant. Hero also created dozens of other automatons: theatrical puppets, singing birds, and steam-powered doors. Engineering was transforming into a spectacle. Fact number 60. The ancient Iberians of the Iberian Peninsula had an alphabet that remains largely undeciphered to this day. Its use began in the 6th century BC. It combined elements of Phoenician and Greek writing but followed its own rules. Some signs represented syllables, others represented sounds. Inscriptions were scratched onto stones, pottery, and bronze tablets. Inscriptions are found from Andalusia to Catalonia. Some texts are long, up to 100 words, but none have been fully read. This script seems to stand at the doorway. We see its form, but we do not hear its meaning. And behind it lies the forgotten language of a people who left no descendants. Fact 61st. In ancient Rome, the concept of damnatio memoria, condemnation of memory, existed. The Senate could decree the erasure of a person's name from all inscriptions, the destruction of their statues, and portraits were either smashed or repainted to resemble someone else. Thus, the images of emperors who lost the power struggle disappeared: Caligula, Commodus, Domitian. Sometimes, the head was simply knocked off a bust and replaced with a new one. For example, Nero's bust was remade into Vespasian's. This was a form of political photoshopping, the destruction of a biography through the editing of stone. But traces remained: unfilled inscriptions, chisel marks, a stranger's face on an old body. Fact 62. The Assyrians had a tradition of inscribing curses onto clay bricks and placing them in the foundations of buildings. The name of the builder, most often the king, was inscribed, along with threats against anyone who might damage the building or erase the name. The wording was harsh. May he have no descendants. May plague strike him. May a dog devour him. These messages were not empty words. They served as a legal act and a protective charm. Archaeologists frequently find such bricks intact under temples, palaces, and walls. Therefore, the foundation was not only stone, but also fear. Fact 63. On the island of Delos, a sacred place for the ancient Greeks, there existed a zone where birth and death were forbidden. According to legend, Apollo and Artemis were born there. To maintain sanctity, the authorities ordered the removal of all burials and the relocation of pregnant women from the island. Later, such laws spread to other sacred lands. Control was strict. Overseers monitored for violations. This was not merely a ritual, but an attempt to create a space outside of time, a place where ordinary biology did not apply. Delos became a myth in stone, supported by law. Fact 64th. The Sumerians had a tax system administered using seals and tablets. Each farmer was required to contribute a portion of their harvest, livestock, or textiles to the state granaries. Scribes kept records using cylindrical seals, each unique like a signature. These were rolled onto wet clay, and the resulting impression verified authenticity. Tablets with symbols of grain, goats, and beer, all part of the taxation system, are found in archives. The Sumerian state collected taxes not with words, but with cuneiform and imagery. The budget began in the fields and ended in temple storehouses.
65th fact. Saharan tribes in the Neolithic era possessed astronomical observatories long before Stonehenge. On the Nabta Playa Plateau in southern Egypt, archaeologists have found stone circles and aligned stelae dating back more than 7,000 years. They indicated the summer solstice and the rising of specific stars. This was not merely observation, but a calendar for nomadic tribes tied to rainfall. The stone markers aided in deciding when to move livestock and where to dig wells. This was not a temple or a tomb, but a survival tool rendered in the geometry of the desert.
Fact 66. In ancient Carthage, there existed trade offerings, miniature models of goods brought to temples as tokens of gratitude. These could include ceramic shoes, baskets with molded bread, and barrels of clay wine. Each item symbolized real profit received. Such findings are commonly encountered in the temples of Tanit and Baal Hamon. They weren't sacrifices in the usual sense. They were an act of agreement between the gods and the merchant. What was an offering for the Greeks was a receipt for a Carthaginian. The temple functioned as a kind of ledger of good fortune. Fact 67. In southern Italy, archaeologists have unearthed bronze tablets inscribed in Oscan, the language of the Samnites. These Abilene tablets contain religious laws and festival regulations. They are written from right to left in a script similar to Etruscan. Some terms are unique. For example, the word for priest, metacluve, and its precise meaning is still debated. The Samnites left few written records, but these tablets demonstrate that their culture possessed a codified religion independent of Rome. In the Iron Age, they wrote not myths, but instructions for rituals. Fact 68. The Inca civilization possessed a highly developed road system, the Capac Ñan, or Royal Road, connecting the entire Andes from Quito to Cusco and Chile. Its total length exceeded 30,000 kilometers. It traversed mountain slopes utilizing bridges, tunnels, and passes at altitudes exceeding 4,000 meters. Along the routes were rest houses, warehouses, signal towers, and stations for chasquis, runners who relayed messages and goods over vast distances in a matter of days. Messages were conveyed using quipu, knotted strings, routes were memorized, and schedules were meticulously maintained. The Inca Empire was built not by the sword, but by feet and stone. Fact 69. In Elam, an ancient state located in modern-day Iran, during the 3rd millennium BCE, there existed female rulers with the title Great Royal Wife, and their roles were far from merely decorative. Inscriptions on tablets and seals demonstrate that they conducted correspondence, managed temples, and possessed their own estates. One such woman, Shimpuhu, left behind a series of directives concerning the construction of a sanctuary. Her name is inscribed alongside the king's on an official stele, in equal size. This indicates that she was not simply a spouse, but a political entity in her own right. In an era where the female voice is rarely recorded, hers rings out clearly. Fact number 70. In Germany, near the ancient settlement of Mainz, a bronze calendar has been found. This disc, with notches and holes, is presumably dated to the 1st century BC. It shows the division of the year into lunar months, with adjustments for the solar cycle. It is believed to have been used by Druids, Celtic priests, and scholars. The calendar marks important dates for harvesting, sacrifices, and gatherings. This is not simply a timekeeping tool, it's a life schedule. The abstract concept of year became a circle with holes, showing tomorrow, the day of the gods. In Harappa, one of the main cities of the Indo-civilization, personal seals were used, carved stone squares depicting animals and pictograms. Archaeologists have found thousands of such objects, none of which are completely identical. Presumably, they served as signatures for traders or owners of goods. Some seals have holes. They were worn as amulets or tokens. Almost every seal is accompanied by a short inscription, still undeciphered to this day. This was not writing in the usual sense, but a personal code. Goods marked with the sign were protected not by a god, but by a personal symbol. Fact 72. The Etruscans had a custom of covering the walls of their tombs with frescoes depicting scenes of feasts, dances, and athletic games. Many such tombs have been found in Tarquinia, creating a paradoxical impression. Instead of sorrow, a celebration. The people depicted on the walls are laughing, drinking wine, playing flutes, pole vaulting. This is not a disregard for death, but rather an understanding of it as a transition to a different but no less vibrant state. Etruscan afterlife is a continuation of earthly life, filled with joy and music. This is an artistic statement. Death is not darkness, but another room in the large house of existence. Fact number 73. Long before the advent of Islam, ancient Arabs held poetic competitions in marketplaces and oases. The most famous was in Ukaz, near Mecca. Poets competed in the genre of qasida, long odes praising generosity, tribal glory, and the beauty of a beloved. The best poems were written on silk with gold ink and displayed on the walls of the Kaaba. These hanging odes, mu'alakat, became the foundation of Arabic poetics. Importantly, this was a method of transmitting history, law, and ideology in a memorable rhythm. The poet was not a decorator, but a bearer of tribal memory. Fact 74. In ancient Nubia, a matrilineal system of succession existed. The throne passed not from father to son, but through the sister. A Kandake, a female monarch, could rule on behalf of the dynasty. The most famous was Amenishekato, who, in the 1st century before our era, successfully repelled a Roman advance under the command of Gaius Petronius. Roman sources describe her as a very strong woman, blind in one eye. Art depicts her with regalia, weapons, and wreaths as a full-fledged ruler. Female rule in Nubia was not an exception, but an institution, with a seal, an army, and the right to wage war. Fact number 75. The Phoenicians introduced not only the alphabet, but also promissory notes used as a means of payment. In cities like Tyre and Sidon, merchants exchanged tablets with symbols indicating obligations, repayment terms, and the names of witnesses. Some of these documents are found on lead plates to prevent forgery. Trade extended over thousands of kilometers from the Levant to Gibraltar, and such bills of exchange avoided the need to transport silver or gold. The Phoenician script became universal, and their promissory notes were the first hint of abstract money. The future banker began with a clay signature. Fact number 76. On the island of Cyprus, during the Bronze Age, there existed urban copper halls, warehouses where copper ingots shaped like ox hides were stored. Each ingot weighed approximately 30 kilograms. They served both as raw material and as currency. Dozens of such warehouses have been discovered in Enkomi and Kalavassos. It is interesting that the ingots were marked with stamps, the mark of the supplier and the customer. This means that 3,500 years ago, metal was traded under contract. Production, transportation, and accounting, everything was conducted systematically. Centuries remained before the advent of coins, but copper already functioned as money, simply in the form of an ox hide.
Fact number 77. In ancient China, during the Zhou dynasty, there existed colleges of ritual, schools that taught not military arts, but proper conduct at receptions, in temples, and at the table. Ritual was considered the foundation of the state. If everyone knows how to bow, whom to let pass first, when to be silent, and when to speak, the country will be in order. The Book of Rites describes how boys were taught from the age of 3, and by 30 they became perfect men, capable of managing their emotions. The curriculum included music, gestures, and dress code. Therefore, the Zhou culture fostered not soldiers and officials, but bearers of harmony. Fact 78. Celtic settlements of the Hallstatt culture yielded artifacts confirming extensive trade with Greece in the east. These include amphorae containing wine, Greek pottery, and amber jewelry. Chieftains were buried with bronze cauldrons, likely originating from the Balkans, and textiles, presumably from the Aegean Sea. Particularly striking are silk threads discovered in the grave of the Princess of Hockdorf, suggesting early contact with the Silk Road. Therefore, 5 centuries before Caesar, the Celts were part of a network where silk and salt were traded extensively. The boundary between barbarians and civilization proved to be blurred through a bag of goods. Fact 79. In the Assyrian capital of Nineveh, there operated a dream archive, a collection of tablets recording the dreams of kings and priests, along with their interpretations. One text states, "If a person sees a house burning, there will be war. If flying, victory in the north." These texts were compiled not for poetic purposes, but as part of intelligence gathering and political strategy. Priests taught how to distinguish a meaningful dream from a useless one, and some dreams were considered omens worthy of altering the king's decisions. Thus, a subjective experience became the source of objective actions. A dream was a form of report, with a seal and consequences. 80 facts. In southern Arabia, in the kingdom of Saba, there existed a system of irrigated terraces transforming mountain slopes into fertile steppes. The construction lasted for centuries, culminating in the Marib Dam, over 500 meters long, with a network of canals, locks, and drainage systems. This dam allowed for the cultivation of grapes, grain, and dates in the desert. Each irrigation plot was recorded, and in case of dam damage, all inhabitants participated in its repair. Later, when the dam collapsed, the kingdom fell into decline. Therefore, water was not only life, but also the foundation of politics. Whoever controlled the flow ruled the land. Fact 81. In ancient India, the technique of steel forging was known long before the Industrial Revolution. The most famous example is the so-called wood steel, or Damascus steel, which was exported to Persia and the Arab world. It was produced in sealed crucibles. Iron was smelted with charcoal, saturating it with carbon. The result was a metal with high strength properties and a characteristic pattern. Wood swords bent but did not break and easily cut other blades. This metal is mentioned in texts from the 1st century before our era. Europe would discover such technologies only 1,500 years later and would be amazed. Fact 82. The Maya civilization possessed not only hieroglyphic writing, but also a sophisticated number system, including the concept of zero, 8 centuries before the appearance of Arabic numerals. They used a vigesimal system, where 1 was represented by a dot, 5 by a horizontal line, and 0 by a shell. This allowed for complex calculations, determining dates, cycles, and making astronomical predictions. The Dresden Codex contains tables of solar and lunar eclipses accurate to the day. 0 for the Maya was not a philosophical category. It was a practical and understandable element of calculation.
This makes their mathematics not archaic, but truly modern. Fact 83. In ancient Rome, there existed women's collegia, associations resembling both guilds and clubs. For instance, the Collegium Mullerium Textricum, a union of female weavers, held meetings, collected dues, and even possessed an altar. Such groups could commission funeral services, organize feasts, and defend the interests of their members. Some had their own statues in temples dedicated to goddesses such as Juno and Minerva. Excluded from formal politics, women created parallel structures with real autonomy. The Collegium provided both protection and a platform where women spoke for themselves, not solely as wives and mothers. Fact number 84. On the Isle of Lewis in Scotland, in the 12th century, famous chess pieces were carved. They were discovered centuries later under peat. They are made of walrus tusk and whalebone, each with an individual facial expression. The berserkers are particularly memorable, pawn figures biting shields. These chess pieces were probably made in Norway and brought to the British Isles by traders or Vikings. They show not only cultural contact, but also a way of thinking, a game where the rook is a fortress and the pawn is a warrior on the brink. The tabletop battle became a model of the world where strategy is as important as the sword. Fact 85. In ancient Egypt, there existed the profession of an official dream interpreter, a priest to whom people brought their dreams for interpretation. The so-called dream papyrus from the time of Ramses II contains interpretations of hundreds of dreams. If a person sees himself drinking beer, good, it means he will receive a blessing. If he eats a crocodile, bad, he will be devoured by debts. These dreams were classified, ranked, and even used in decision-making. Psychoanalysis here was not personal, but state-sponsored. Through dreams, they communicated with the afterlife. But the conclusions drawn were quite earthly. To build or not to build, to marry or to postpone. Fact 86. In the Pergamon kingdom, a rival of Alexandria, parchment, a thin, durable animal skin, was invented as a replacement for papyrus. The cause was an embargo. The Egyptians stopped supplying papyrus, fearing competition in the book trade. Pergamon's craftsmen mastered the technique of skin processing, achieving smoothness and durability. The new material proved more resistant and allowed writing on both sides. Parchment supplanted papyrus by the Middle Ages, and the city's name became a generic term. This is an example of how a single ruler's political decision can generate a technology that outlasts both cities and kingdoms. Fact 87. In ancient Rome, there existed a special position, auctor funerum, the organizer of funerals. This was not simply an undertaker, but a director of the ritual. He hired mourners, arranged with musicians, and chose the route to the funeral pyre. Wealthy families staged entire spectacles with speeches, theatrical masks of ancestors, and torches at night. The paradox is that funerals became a stage for political gestures. Speeches were given, alliances were forged, and generosity was displayed. Death became a public act, and the auctor was the director, with one attempt but many spectators. 88th fact. In the Yayoi period in Japan, around 300 years before the Common Era, burials included mirrors, bronze spears, and dotaku bells buried in the ground alongside the deceased. These bells lacked clappers. They didn't ring, but served as amulets or status symbols. They were decorated with drawings, rice paddies, deer, birds. Archaeologists believe that dotaku were used in agricultural rituals, to invoke rain or to give thanks to the harvest spirit. They were buried in the earth as offerings to the earth gods. Therefore, metal in Japan was not only a weapon, but a bridge between humanity and nature. 89th fact. In the Eideon Andron cave on Crete, the legendary birthplace of Zeus, archaeologists unearthed bronze tablets containing prayers to the god, prototypes of good luck notes. They bear inscriptions requesting health, a bountiful harvest, and love. Some tablets are shaped like hands, eyes, or feet, a visual indication of the body part needing healing. These tablets, called ex voto, were buried in the ground or hung in caves. This created a pagan archive of hopes where each word was an attempt to outsmart fate, to fix the desire in bronze and thus bring its fulfillment closer. Fact 90. The Andean peoples of the pre-Inca period created megalithic structures carved with jewel-like precision from hard volcanic stone. The most famous example is Sacsayhuaman, a fortress above Cusco, where stone blocks weighing up to 100 tons are fitted together without mortar so tightly that a blade will not pass between them. The surface of the blocks is smooth, the angles are multifaceted. The processing technology remains a mystery. Stone tools do not explain such accuracy. This was not merely an outpost, but a demonstration of skill and power. Stone in the hands of these masters became not an obstacle, but a material of subordinate geometry. In the library of Ashurbanipal, astrological records have been found. These records precisely document eclipses, comets, and planetary movements, including dates, observation locations, and predicted consequences. One text states, "If the moon disappears in the west, the kingdom of Elam will weaken. If a star moves backward, a messenger should be sent to Uruk." These notes were kept for centuries, with astronomers working in shifts. Their interest lay not simply in the sky, but in the connection between celestial order and earthly politics. This was a daily record not of the world of stars, but of the world of court intrigues, written under the cover of the heavens. Fact 92. In Dmanisi, a settlement in modern-day Georgia, remains of Homo erectus dating back 1,800,000 years have been found. These remains show evidence of care for the sick. One skeleton belonged to an individual who had lost all their teeth, yet lived for many years afterward. This indicates that they were fed and supported by others. Therefore, compassion existed long before culture and writing. This is the oldest evidence of social empathy. Even without temples, laws, and empires, there was a helping hand. Humanity is older than civilization. Fact 93. The ancient Hittites had oaths with harsh curses, including ecological imagery. One such text states, "If you break your word, may the mountains melt like wax in fire. May the fields become salt, and your family like a puddle after rain." The oath was spoken aloud in the presence of statues of the gods, and it was recorded on clay or bronze. Such documents are found in the Bogas Khoi archive. This was not merely a moral vow. It was a legal and religious act simultaneously, with deadlines, witnesses, and a clear punishment. The words were not a promise, but a contract with the cosmos. Fact 94. The walls of the Lascaux cave, approximately 17,000 years old, depict not only animals, but also figures with a recurrent pattern of dots and lines. Some researchers believe these are ancient attempts at recording information, possibly related to lunar phases or animal migrations. The repetition of elements suggests a counting system. If this hypothesis is correct, these are some of the earliest calendars in history, painted by hunters who could not write but could observe. Art here is not decoration, but memory. Instructions for survival are encoded in charcoal and ochre. Fact 95. In Siberia, on the Lena riverbank, an ancient human settlement has been discovered. Dwellings there were constructed from mammoth bones. The bones were arranged in a ring and animal hides were stretched over the top. One such dwelling contains over 100 bones, including giant skulls. These structures date back 20,000 years. This indicates that it was not a temporary shelter, but a planned dwelling. People not only hunted, but also engaged in design, considering factors such as stability, warmth, and material accessibility. Before us is an architecture of ice and death, where survival became a matter of engineering thought. Fact 96. Ancient Greeks possessed automatic theaters, mechanical scenes powered by water or steam. Heron of Alexandria describes a theater in a box where characters move in a circle, scenery changes, thunder rumbles, and fire flashes. All this happens without the participation of actors.
These devices showed scenes from myths such as the Judgment of Paris or the Return of Odysseus. The audience watched as the gods themselves moved across the stage, guided by hidden gears. Art and technology were combined in a box full of wonders, and not a single actor was ever late for a rehearsal. Fact 97. In ancient Sparta, kings had 2 thrones each because there were 2 kings. The dualistic system allowed for 2 kings simultaneously from different dynasties, the Agiads and the Eurypentides. One would lead the army on campaigns, the other would remain in the city and manage internal affairs. If one died, the other remained untouched. A successor was chosen only within his line. This structure balanced power and reduced the risk of usurpation. But the kings were always overseen by the Council of Elders, the Gerousia, and the Popular Assembly, which could reject the decision of either king. Monarchy in Sparta was strict, but not absolute, like a knife held in 2 hands. Fact number 98. In Mesoamerica, there existed book codices made from fig tree bark, coated with lime and folded like an accordion. The Maya, Aztec, and Mixtec peoples recorded calendars, chronicles, and myths on them. One of the most famous is the Codex Borgia, a richly illustrated manuscript describing sacrifices, astronomical events, and days of power. These books were not read page by page, but diagonally, by color, by symbols, as if they were a game. Scribes underwent years of training, and the book was kept as a relic, not only a source of knowledge, but also a vessel of the gods. During the colonial period, most of the codices were destroyed, but those that survived are still read as a hymn to visual thought. Fact 99. The ancient Thracians, inhabiting the Balkans, had a cult of music connected to mysteries and rituals. Legend says Orpheus originated from there. Archaeologists have found bronze flutes, harps, lyres, and wall paintings where a musician is depicted in the center of the scene, surrounded by priests and warriors. In some burials, musical instruments were placed with the deceased, a sign that they were conductors to the other world. Music was considered not entertainment, but a force capable of subduing beasts, gods, and death. For the Thracians, art sounded in ritual, as a language spoken by the soul. In the Chauvet Cave in France, cave paintings have been preserved that are over 30,000 years old, the oldest known in the world. Horses, rhinoceroses, lions, and bison are depicted using perspective, movement, and shadows. Some scenes are almost animated. An animal has several heads, as if the artist wanted to show running or turning. The paint consists of ochre, charcoal, sometimes mixed with fat. Who painted them is unknown, but one thing is clear. The person standing in the darkness with a torch and pigment was no longer just a survivalist. He was an author, director, and chronicler. Art began not with a frame and signature, but with breath in the depths of the stone.